Good afternoon, everyone. It's definitely been a very interesting session this afternoon, and I'm actually very glad that this session on access to finance follows the one right before on building the enabling environment, because I think some of the issues that were discussed in that session are sort of very critical, I think, in ensuring entrepreneurs have access to finance at each stage of development. Access to finance, I think, is a global challenge actually faced by many entrepreneurs, even here in the United States, but I think even more so in emerging markets. Before I started working at OPIC, I actually lived in Tunisia working for an international finance institution that was providing finance not just to Tunisia, but just for the whole region. And I think access to finance for businesses at every stage was probably the #1 challenge facing businesses in that country, particularly SMEs, and then particularly startups. And I think a bunch of the young entrepreneurs earlier mentioned that as well. Additionally, I think this is an important point that may have not been made earlier, is that when you're a woman-owned business, it's even more challenging. It's really daunting, particularly in some of the countries. If I can speak briefly about OPIC before we get started, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is the U.S. government's development finance institution, our job is really to mobilize U.S. private capital in support of entrepreneurs, particularly in regions very critical to U.S. foreign policy, as the Middle East and North Africa are. OPIC has committed over $8 billion since 1972, and we currently have around $2.6 billion in our exposure in the region, and we're committed to do much more. So I'm very interested in talking to some of the entrepreneurs afterwards. We are, to a certain degree, very demand-driven. So without entrepreneurs like many of you in this room, OPIC could never get a deal done. OPIC, of course, recognizes the importance of entrepreneurship in advancing sustainable growth, and its primary strategy in advancing entrepreneurship is through OPIC's EDN Enterprise Development Network, a public-private partnership consisting of hundreds of organizations. Many of you, I think, are here today. Is there any of you who are EDN network people? Please raise your hand so I know who you are. Thank you. It includes, I think, more than 1,500 business consultants worldwide ready to assist entrepreneurs, particularly SMEs, in overcoming the multitude of challenges they face from concept of an idea through funding. And my colleague who manages that at OPIC, Gary Collier, is here. Gary, please raise your hand so they know to get in touch with you afterwards. You can connect with him. I think a few developments that we are seeing, to which I think some of the panelists will speak about as well, and some of you mentioned it earlier, is first of all, I think we're seeing an increased collaboration, not just among the U.S. government agencies, but also I think international financial institution. Mary Beth mentioned the G8 and the Deauville process. We're doing a lot more deals now with USAID, the State Department, and other international partners like the IFC and EBRD, which has also expanded its portfolio, been beyond Europe and moved over to do more projects in the Middle East as well, and North Africa. And I think in order to address these needs for access to finance, there needs to be all kinds of capital and instruments, grant money, equity, debt, technical assistance, and none of us can do it all. I think there's also a lot of room for foundations, such as the Kauffman Foundation and Skoll, and many others who have also, I think, an important role to play. And the second point is, I think someone mentioned it right before, and the question, the gentleman from Egypt, from Goldman Sachs, is the role that diaspora communities are, I think, having in providing seed capital to important investments in their countries of origin. At OPIC, some of the most innovative and highly developmental investments that we have made have been in partnership with members of the diaspora communities. I must tell you, soon after the Arab Spring, the first people that walked in through our doors were Tunisian Americans and Egyptian Americans that were not going to wait until the dust settled in, but were very enthusiastic about the opportunities in their countries of origin. And they often have very long-term outlooks and have very personal connections and have a good understanding, I think, of the risks. So I think some of the panelists will touch on that too, because I think they really do make good partners for us. Before I turn on to the panelists, though, I really do want to thank and acknowledge the State Department's Global Partnership Initiative, which over the last few years has been really leading such innovative programs in support of entrepreneurship globally, particularly the Partners for New Beginning initiative, which Secretary Albright also talked about, and which she chairs, which has 10 different locally owned and locally driven national chapters. And I believe some of the PNB partners are here in the audience today. And the second one is the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance, IDEA, which also seeks to harness the power of the diaspora and connect them with investments in the US and their home countries. The State Department, as many of you know, hosted the first ever diaspora conference ever at the State Department, and it also hosted the first Impact Investment Conference, which was very successful. Like many of you here at OPIC, we have partnered with GPI on those initiatives, and it's actually materialized into investments for us. We're very proud of that partnership, and we thank you to Chris Balderson and his leadership for his entire team. With that said, I think we have 3 panelists with us today that have decades of experience in both raising capital and investing successfully, that can share their experiences and some of the challenges that the other panelists have talked about, but also I think some of the opportunities they see for entrepreneurs, particularly in the MENA region. And I'd like to start over. I think all of you have their bios, so I'm really not going to go into a long description because they've done it all. But I'd like to hand over first to Dr. Osam Hassanin, I hope I say your name right, to talk about the 2 organizations you chair, Rising Tide Fund and TechWadi as well. And after that, I'll have Altak and Driss will each discuss institutions they represent and how they're helping the role in supporting entrepreneurs, and particularly on access to capital. If we can start with you, Dr. Osama.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, in a very, very strange twist of events, I owe a great deal to the US government, actually. Back in 1982, when half of us were born and the other half still to be born, the better half, of course, the Advanced Research Project Agency was financing the creation of DARPANET, which became the Internet. And the 3 hubs were UCLA, MIT, and UCSB. And through UCSB, we ended up developing, if you will, the connection devices to the Internet, the routers. We ran out of fund in 1990, and the government was kind enough to say, you can take all the technology that we have financed if you take all the employees that are working at UCSB. So we were relocated in a bankrupt Jesuit church in downtown Santa Barbara and created a company that uninspiringly is called Advanced Computer Communication, which sold eventually to Ericsson for $300 million. So it does tell you that sometimes the government financing, when handed over to the private equity, can achieve absolutely amazing results. Fast forward now to 2009 with President Obama's speech in my country, and to the first Global Entrepreneurship Summit here in April 2010, where the members of the diaspora got together and decided that it is also our role to engage mind and heart and money to promote this amazing initiative of reaching out to the home countries to support. Very, very briefly, I'm going to maybe highlight the accomplishments of the members of TechWadi along the pentagram dimensions, if you will. The first one is education. And here, by and large, the internship program it's a little bit like education for employment, and if you'd like to know more about it, I think Naguib Sawiris is here from Stanford University. Leah Lazar was one of the brilliant interns, now with the IFC. You can speak with her about how the program effectively run. On the outreach, curriculum enhancement, online education, exchange residence program from Algeria to the United Arab Emirates, we have Dr. Sibin Rawan, awesome man here, as well as Dr. Salah Farjonj, Washington University, who can tell you a great deal about how the applicability of what they do creates immense opportunity and skill, filling the skill gap, if you will, for their students. I would like to thank OPIC because without your support for the Net Kitabi project, that's 1 laptop per child, which we started 2 years ago in Palestine and are well on our way to procure, this is not to give, 130,000 laptops for children aged 7 to 17, and with the support of university students to learn how to develop Facebook applications that double the per capita income for their family. On the incubation program, I think Hind mentioned Beritech, one of the awesome incubators, and Georges Chamas is here. He's one of the co-founders of Beritech in Lebanon, and he can talk to you about how it has scaled and has helped entrepreneurs succeed. Flat Six Lab, Ahmed Alfi is here, 18 companies now, one of the most successful ones in Egypt. But to the extent that we are actually not represented here by AMENS, American Middle Eastern Network for Dialogue at Stanford, started by Stanford students, and we do bring in 22 entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs from the Middle East every year for 5 days incubation at Stanford, an extraordinary program. The upcoming one is going to be in April. You're welcome to attend. On the third dimension is acceleration. Oasis 500, I think, is the best one, 54 companies today, and Osama can talk some more about it. On the mentorship, I have to be very specific. We are very particular in that we actually focus in mentorship not on being with someone, but on ensuring that the people we work with achieve success in what they have signed up to do. So with the MIT Arab Business Plan competition, we choose 3 from 3,000, this year 4,500, and usually 2 of the 3 end up as number 1, as number 2. Why? A little bit of attention. It has nothing to do with us, but it has to do with how you fill the gap between preparing a business plan and winning. Luckily enough, at Stanford, with the Start X, we encourage the Arab community that actually comes to Stanford to sign up for the program. 3 months incubation, and my wife, who's here, will tell you, every Saturday at 11, someone comes in to talk specifically about mentorship and financing. So they end up being actually a very select group of people. And then finally, on the financing, we have, Ahmed Lalfi can talk to you about Sawari Ventures, and Salim Jabr about an amazing program for angel financing. Mona Mwafi about the mentorship, about Nigma. But on the financing, interesting enough, the very first boot camp that we started following the Global Entrepreneurship Summit at AUC, and many of you would remember, we had 300 applicants. 10 of them were selected as finalists. Every single one of them today has been financed, sometimes from established venture capital, sometimes from angel financing.
Great. Next, could we go to Oltak Unsal, who's the coordinator for access to markets and finance at InfoDev at the World Bank Group.
Thank you, first of all, for organizing this and moderating it. I'm happy to be here. And before I go on the negative side and talk about failures and all that our organizations have, and in coordination with other such organizations, I would love to do 2 announcements, because otherwise my boss would hate me if I didn't plug in what we do. So hopefully in about 6 months or so, we're going to be launching an angel co-investment facility in the Middle East and North Africa in the amount of about 70 million. And hopefully that will spur some of the angel investments, which of course we've heard quite a bit about. And of course this may not happen because I said that we were going to launch this facility 2 years ago, and then a year ago, and now I'm saying it again. So if it doesn't happen, don't hold me to it, and I'll talk about that in a little bit too. The good news is, though, we are launching, World Bank is launching a $30 million facility in Lebanon that's going to focus on early stage financing, which I know some of these entrepreneurs have talked about, and of course it's one of the biggest challenges. So with those 2 public announcements, now I'm going to focus on the things that we could do better. One such thing, of course, is at an organization such as the World Bank InfoDev, even though we're giving all this advice to entrepreneurs, embrace failure, be like Silicon Valley, you know, go at it and learn the skills. And we don't necessarily apply that to ourselves. So we hate failure, we don't like risk, and it takes an inordinate amount of time to experiment with things like crowdfunding. You know, I joined the bank about 2 years ago. I come from the private sector I was an investor and an entrepreneur. I had a 2-page concept note saying, we got to do crowdfunding. And, you know, even the United States hasn't done it, so we have to do one in MENA, we have to do one in Vietnam. Fast forward 2 years, we haven't even researched it yet because it was tough to even talk about these things. And so that's one thing that I think we could do better. The other one is we also don't like to partner up with other organizations. You know, we have our mandates, we have our descriptions boxes, so even the definitional issues get in the way. For instance, when I say, I want to help entrepreneurs, okay, which entrepreneur? Is it the one that's going to start a business? Is it the one that's going to go do something good at a big company? Is it a lifestyle entrepreneur? Is it a growth entrepreneur? And what's an SME? You know, we all love to help SMEs. Small Business Administration loves SMEs. But SME, which SME? The SME that grows, like that's going to basically start at zero and go to $5 million in a year and therefore add all these jobs that we talk about? Or is it the one who's going to open up the second gas station around the corner? So all these things, definitional issues. Is it going to be equity, debt? Is it going to be crowd-funded equity, angel? You know, is it going to be grant, intelligent grant, grant version 2.0? So all these things get in the way of us essentially talking about the same language. And when you don't talk about the same language, it's tough to partner up because what are you exactly doing? What's your mandate? And the last thing that we could do better is essentially, even though World Bank looks like the apex predator, you know, the fund managers come to us and, you know, the governments come to us and we're like the one who gives you the money. Well, guess what? We then go to the United States or the Finnish government and say, hey, we have all these brilliant programs like Usama has been, essentially we've been talking for a while how we can support them. And then of course, you know, we want to support them, but then I have to take this idea and go to my bosses, which is the United States government, and say, look, what about we have a program by which we essentially support Usama? And of course, you know, the donors need to be convinced, and unlike your entrepreneurs, my presentation skills haven't been better, so I can go with like a really crisp, this is how we support. And so because of these three things, I think, you know, if we can be innovative in our own work, I think we can do much better. And I think if we do much better, then some of these innovation could be financed, and it could be financed in a much more innovative way.
Next, we have Driss Temsamani,
yes,
who's with Citibank, but also is the founder of the Maghreb Growth Economic Fund and Foundation.
Thank you, Mimi. Well, I do have an announcement to make, and that is that
Everyone
I have no
has
announcements
announcements.
to make. So now, let's see. Well, you heard I work for Citibank, and you think access to capital will be the perfect panel for me to be here today. But that's not the reason. I am a Moroccan American. I've been in the States for 26 years, and for somebody that has been involved with the Moroccan American community here in the U.S., I've noticed that there was nothing in the community that was around financing or was around how to plan for a better future for yourself, for your children, for your family. The community is fragmented and does not have a look toward being financially included, be it here in the U.S. or even as the community goes back home. Then in 2011, I had an opportunity to join the Partners for New Beginning, which was led by Lorraine. I don't think she's here with us today, but I know it's very Lorraine and Shelley. And by joining that delegation, it was an eye-opening experience for me because I realized that there were so much opportunities sitting in Morocco today from a financing flow point of view that none of the community members here in the U.S. were taking advantage of. So followed by a visit to Algeria and Tunisia, the opportunity became even more obvious. So as I got back to the U.S. With my partner, Amin, who's sitting over there, we had the idea to create what's called the Maghreb Economic Growth Fund and a foundation behind. And what this fund does is basically creates an organized approach for the Moroccan diaspora to actually invest in entrepreneurs back in Morocco to start and eventually to go to Algeria and Tunisia. This has been a long process. We did not start with several entrepreneurs. We decided to go just with one example, with one individual that we mentored and we helped to build as far as the business plan is concerned and start his business in Morocco as well here in the U.S. And after all that learning experience, we're ready to go farther now. We're ready to expand. And that has been I will say, the private and public partnership that we had with the State Department is that being here in the U.S., we had no idea that there were such programs that existed as Moroccan American community members. And now that we know that these programs exist, we can link to them and start to work on creating financial flows that will go to Morocco and other parts of the region that go beyond remittances. And these are new flows. These are not mixed with FDI and other type of capital investments that are coming to the countries. These are diaspora investments in the entrepreneurship space in Morocco.
That's great. I'll start with the first question, maybe for you, Dr. Osama, because I think Tekwadi and the Rising Tide Fund has worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, and even after they get the initial funding, I think about those 3 young entrepreneurs in the earlier panel that managed to get their little seed money, 50,000, 100,000, but I'm sure if they want to scale up, they're going to need a little bit more, and hopefully the term sheet for the $500,000 comes through for you. But can you give an example, specific, and you talked about several of those that you've actually assisted and helped and funded, but can you specifically talk about one and what you had to do, whether it's new skills you had to bring, whether it was new training you had to bring, you know, how you connected to them and what it took to get them to the next level of scaling up?
Thank you. So back in 2000, we started the internship program. And at the time, we would form teams of 5 people to play the role of CEO, VP of Marketing, VP of Product Development, and so on and so forth, on a very specific project for a corporate beneficiary, if you will. And the assumption was that the company would actually hire them to implement the program, which did not happen. 10 years later, one of the 5, every one of them has been very successful in his life, but one of the 5 became the president of the Entrepreneurship Club at Stanford University. He is the one who actually led us to the creation of an incubator in Cairo, which since then had been closed, Plug and Play Egypt. So he launched a Groupon lookalike company called Offerna. Today, Offerna has in excess of 50 employees. Last month, even though it hasn't been announced, the company has exceeded in monthly revenues what it had projected for the year and is cash flow positive. And for a Groupon, I mean, Groupon is not cash flow positive at $2 billion in revenues. So when you are at a fraction of this, maybe 100th of this, you would think that we have done very well. There were many, many issues related to the skill gap that you have addressed. Related to the conflict resolution is an important one. Related to the commitment that each member of the team makes. Related to the trust, not in oneself, but the trust that one conveys, the implied covenants of good faith in dealing that needs to be built between the team. Related to the definition by each member of the team of the value they contribute, not of the title they have. And then, of course, on top of this, subscribe to the results that need to be achieved. What are they? Whether it is in revenues, in customer acquisition, or as was mentioned earlier today, in the effective deployment of the fund to achieve maximum result in value creation.
Altak, do you want to add on to that at all?
No, I don't really have much to say on that topic.
Sure. Maybe I'll ask you another question. Sure. OPIC and DFIs in general, I think the World Bank, IFC, and many others have set aside, billions of dollars, particularly soon after the Arab Spring. And I think there's, in your experience, what is sort of the biggest hurdle in connecting the capital-hungry enterprises in the region to the capital that is actually available but is not being dispersed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, when you look at something like that, again, when I was talking about definitions, I am really insistent that we talk about what exactly, who are we connecting with what types of capital. And the definitions matter because from even like market failure, is this a market failure? Meaning we want somebody from Dubai not put money into real estate where they know how to put money in real estate, they know how to make money, and if they lose money, they know why they lost money too. So, and for that type of a person to now take the money and put it in the entrepreneur, and they don't, is this a market failure or are they actually being rational? So in their context, there's perhaps some rationality and perhaps some educational stuff. Maybe if we showed, okay, if you were to put money in Maktub, you would have made X amount of money. One of these things could be the next Maktub of the Middle East. And so from that perspective, I see our mandate to either take some of these good ideas and scale them up with the billions that we've amassed, or in the case that we also have to do I think, a bit trailblazing too. And if we take the necessary risks, we can essentially put our money into these ideas, like crowdfunding is an idea, right? Put the money there. If you're going to lose it, fine. At least you learned from it, so take it, and you could put it in something else. Or Jeff talked about how, for instance, it's really the entrepreneur and not the project that should be the atomic unit. So what if we found a mechanism of where we're actually financing the entrepreneur and not the idea? So maybe the entrepreneur fails with this idea. Next idea, they might make money, but I didn't finance them in my current scheme. I financed the business, so I'm basically out of luck next time up. So maybe there's a mechanism where I'm making things up right now, so don't quote me on this, but maybe I am financing the entrepreneur. If they fail now, maybe they give me a little bit of peace in their next venture, something like that. So I think an organization such as ours and other DFIs either should come in and scale things up that work, or if something is not working or something hasn't been tried, then we should essentially try those and use the learnings, whether they're failures or not, use those learnings and apply elsewhere. But you're right, in the sense that we need to coordinate. There's a lot of money. Money is not the issue. It's basically the mentorship angles, all the education, that's the issue. But I think we just need to be...
Do you think there's a little bit of money missing, at least at the early stage? Do you think there's enough money for early stage funding, for like seed capital? I find that that's where there's a bit of a gap.
If you look at the... It's essentially is a progress is happening. Right now, 2 years ago, you had no early stage, and now you have early stage. You have the accelerators. And that's really an evolution that we see. You see in Lebanon, in Egypt, everywhere you look around, there's at least one early stage fund where it didn't exist earlier. And so is it enough? It's never enough. You know, you never see an entrepreneur saying, I don't need access to capital. I've never seen that. That's why even like researching that, researching the needs of the demand side is ridiculous because, so there's never enough money. Sure. But I think, you know, the smart thing to do is to literally unlock that money through new ways of doing things, because somebody might ask, look, in the US, in Silicon Valley, all these early stage financing firms, it looks like Kaufman says 95% of them fail. So we're using the tools that don't seem to work anymore, maybe, or maybe they never worked, we don't know, and trying to apply them to the developing world, the Middle East. Maybe we can be smarter about it. We can essentially, just like how the developing world bypasses the current generation of mobile technology, goes to the next one, maybe it's our mandate to essentially catalyze that, and so they can go to the next gen of innovative financing.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll address
the question. Yeah, sure.
I don't think it's an issue of dispersing capital as much as a resistance from investors to invest in some of these parts of the world. No? And some of it has to do with the culture of entrepreneurs, in the sense that most of them build businesses to own for life and then pass them on to their children. It becomes a family business. There is no exit strategies. There is, and I think you said I fell in love with my product and with my business. That will be very hard for you to eventually sell it and for your investors to make money. And so there is an issue of culture around entrepreneurship, besides all the other risks that we can talk if we have time. But that's one aspect of it, is investors don't see exit strategies. Investors sometimes don't see a way of repatriating their gains outside the countries where they invest in, so their money is stuck, is frozen in the countries where they invest in. So that there are many issues that are forcing this capital not to be dispersed.
Just to follow up on that, just with you, Driss, since you're launching the Maghreb Growth Fund, and it's one of sort of a growing number of diaspora initiatives. And do you think, because the diaspora is so connected and has a much long-term view, do you think they're easier investors to work with? They're not looking for a 5 to 10 year, much shorter term exit than other investors?
What I think is there is a concept of financial education, and as we talk about financial inclusion in some parts of the world, you cannot have an organized community, you cannot have progress and development if you don't financially include the people within your community. I think there is also that within diaspora. Diaspora members, at least in my community, what I see, there's not enough financial education about planning for the future. It's very short-term. It's a very narrow vision. He's basically working hard, making money, sending some of that to your family back home for for the remittances and the money that flows to some of these countries, and also making it well enough to just establish yourself as a middle class in the country. Now, if we start to educate around planning for the future, invest in retirement, so forth, so on, then yes, that becomes a language that that can be built within the community to eventually take those flows to the country where they want to invest. Now, the issue will remain again, what are the risks? How do you take your money out if you need to? So forth, so on. So there are many aspects that affect that decision.
Sure. I know we don't have much time, but I'd really like to open it up to the floor, to those, I think Oasis, 500 people that have their elevator pitches. You have 3 people here that could potentially fund your project. So questions or comments? Yes, you gentlemen.
Thanks so much. My name is Amir Rahman. I work with an investment firm called Fajr Capital. In the Middle East, we see, at least in the financial markets overall, a large role for Islamic finance or Sharia-compliant finance, certainly in the banking sector and increasingly in the asset management space as well. To what degree do you think that has a role to play, or should some of the capital mechanisms for entrepreneurship entail or involve an element of Sharia compliance, or are they sort of equity-based by definition and therefore is this a non-issue? But how meaningful is this Sharia-compliant element when it comes to funding entrepreneurs in the Middle East?
Why don't we take 2 more questions and then we'll...
Hi everyone, my name is Ovidiu Pujaran and I manage the Driss initiative. My question is about the creation of the local angel and investment networks. From your experience, which ideas did you see working in terms of persuading more investors in more traditional industries, and also if you have examples of diaspora investors that successfully invested in new ventures, especially technology ventures in their country of origin?
Sure. One more. Yes. Last question.
Last year we did an assessment about youth in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt, and one question came is, why do you, are you interested in opening your own business? Many of them said no. And doing focus group, I had the sense that most of them have a sense of apathy, that we are not part of socioeconomic group that allow us to really have access to capital. So the question to scale up all these successful models that we've been hearing all the day today, what does it take to really reach the unreachable youth? They are talented and smart, but they did not go to AUB or AUC, and they are not really coming from X family that allow them to have access to capital. And I see a lot of big gap there.
Thank you. Do you want to start off with anything, any one of you?
In terms of the Sharia compliance of any of these instruments, I think the more early stage, the more entrepreneurial oriented go, the more it's going to be about risk sharing. And so I think some of these things by default are going to be automatically Sharia compliant. And I don't think debt type instruments work as well as other types when you're looking for something if there's a 90% failure rate, then you can't, it's tough to do a debt instrument around that. So I think by default, everything I do is automatically Sharia compliant, whether I want it that way or not. So that's the good news. I also wanted to answer Ovidio's question here about the angel investors. Now, it is very interesting. I think the real challenge is not so much to understand what the entrepreneurs want, but more what the angels want. If they have money, and money, by the way, is not, again, the real constraint here. It's more the mentorship angle, whatever they teach, all the soft skills. And so I've been to at least 20 catalyzing meetings so far, where we go and try to get these angels interested. And I've done this in places where you'd say, well, there are angels there. In Burkina Faso, there are no angels there. I mean, there's not even entrepreneurs there. And in places like West Bank and Gaza, so really tough places, to places where there's a lot of natural resources like Kazakhstan and Saudi Arabia. And then there are a lot of places where you'd see things coming together, like Jordan and maybe Chile. So what I see is this. I think, I'm going to get sappy now, so don't allow me if that gets, people want to help. right? At the end of the day, Jeff wants to help, right? He wants to be able to teach whatever he learned, and that legacy, I mean, you don't want so much more money anymore because money is not interesting anymore for some of these people. And I call them the normative angels because these people see, yes, it's good to make money, but they're more interested in the legacy aspects of it, teaching these youth and women how to be better entrepreneurs. And those normative angels, the minute you put them in a room as anchor angels, then they literally, like a virus, start affecting other people. Other people want to now be with them. And so I've seen that there are ways to essentially get that type of infrastructure going, just literally by putting these people in the same room and let some sort of a magic happen. And so that's one good learning that I've seen around the world. So it's almost like, yes, we do want the angels to unlock the value, and now they have resources like the crowdfunding platform. So they're not alone. So you can get the Diaspora, you can get like the Caribbean is a pretty tough case too. You can essentially, but they have the biggest Diaspora. And so the minute you put the Diaspora in front of a platform that's credible enough, then that virtuality starts not being an issue. So local versus Diaspora tends to disappear a little bit, which is, by the way, counterintuitive because in the past 20 years, when you look at angel development, we always say they have to be local. Like Sand Hill Road can't invest 2 miles outside of the Sand Hill Road. Well, that's getting a little bit tested these days. Why? Because you have the new Twitters and the Facebooks and new ways of essentially connecting. So we're constantly learning.
Yeah. Let me try to answer the question about the Sharia, and I'm assuming this is an Islamic country model. And so it's not an answer, but it's a question. How does the Sharia deals with the corruption piece, right? Because we tend to look at the half of the equation. We tend to look at the financing structure, but yet we forget that corruption itself is against the religion. So, I mean, how do we deal with the, should we just close an eye on one side and open it on the other side? So that's one. On the other hand, I think, and as far as diaspora is concerned, I think credibility is the word. I think proof of concept is necessary. There's a lot of buzz going on. We all heard it in the different panels about entrepreneurship and financing. I think the team here, the young entrepreneurs, said it very well. You gotta put the money where the word is, and if you said you're gonna finance that, then finance. And so I think the proof of concept is important. I think the diaspora is very suspicious in many ways and in different communities, but suspicious about taking their hard-earned money and putting it somewhere else where they just don't know where it's going to go. So having a partner, and in our case, that is how we're doing it, that is on the ground, doing the oversight, being on the ground, creating the proof of the concept, and then using that to do your road shows and to actually promote the idea within the community. I believe that will go a long ways, and we're still testing the model. I'm here today to tell you that we have done it with a proof of concept, but I could come back later in a few months and tell you how's that working within the community, and if we have takers as far as investors are concerned.
I think, if I may comment on, if I may comment on your question about sort of the youth not being interested in entrepreneurship, and I think a lot of it has to do with enabling an environment. And Mary Beth, talking about the 600 or so regulations that affect businesses in a country that cannot be very entrepreneurial. I was just at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation event in Dakar, Senegal this past weekend. The whole thing focused on youth, and it was incredible. We met with a lot of entrepreneurs, young people, because they said, when we graduate from college, we know there are no jobs for us. We have to create our own businesses. But one of them said, look, to create a business in this country, it costs more than $1,000. So I registered my business in Delaware, which was kind of interesting to find out. I'm sure the senators from Delaware would be happy to hear that. But those kind of things are not very conducive to a young person who sees all the red tape, might not have the right connections to the right places to start a business. I mean, why even try? So I think those are the kind of things where governments should take a much bigger role and to improve, I think, they're doing business in their countries.
The angel list today has about 180,000 active investors, and I think that there are maybe 10,000 of them are Arab Americans. I don't think any one of us is any different from anyone else. We are neither more suspicious nor are we more careful. That issue of what is our money going in terms of value creation is, of course, very important because that's the nature of venture capital. There are many success stories that some of you know of that are far, far bigger than Maktoub. For example, AdMob, in 3 years, sold for $750 million. And I think that between Omar Hamawi and Ali Diab, they must have invested in at least 10 companies since then without any discrimination. Ali Diab happens to be a very devout Muslim, but he still considers convertible debenture to be a legitimate financing. It has nothing to do with fixed interest. It's all absolutely risk capital. So while we live a Sharia-compliant life, we don't necessarily go to a mufti to tell us how to apply it.
Thank you. I've been told we are way over time. We're available for questions afterwards. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you.